want to thank everybody for coming on a wintry Monday night. By the way, in case you're interested, there is a CLE that we actually did on YouTube that's from Nassau County Bar Association members that I conducted on electronic discovery. It's called Electronic Discovery 101 with Frank Cantorino of Empire Discovery. I can give you the link for that, but if you want, you can play that in your car over the Bluetooth. And so not only would you get the 2 credits for this class, but you get another free credit on the way home. So, it's all about upselling. So there you go. All right. Just to change things up, one other thing. We are producing a television show, which is kind of cool, talking about, sort of the opportunity. So starting around January on Hamptons TV, which is WVVH TV, it's Files 14, it's Optum 78. We're going to be producing a show, and Alex is the maestro of that. It's called Live from My Father's Place, and it will feature a lot of the live acts and some interviews, and I do some of the interviews, and Eppy's got all the great bands, and some of the emerging artists. I want to just shift gears. So why don't we just talk a little bit about security, and then we'll go back into the outline. We kind of deviated from the course materials, but I don't think anyone's going to mind too much. But this is Jared.
Hi, how are you?
And former electronics warfare officer, and a lot of very important things. Now, as lawyers, what is the one thing that we always concern ourselves with? Liability. It's always about the boogeyman, liability. Threats to your liquor license, safety, fights. I represented a bar in Bayside, Queens, and someone let someone in underage once, and there was a fight, and somebody picked up a chair, and during the wind back, hit somebody in the orbit of their eye. Big personal injury lawsuit, and there may or may not have been insurance at the time. This is, of course, in the 90s. Statute of limitations all past. The club has been sold. But, you do have to worry about security. Alcohol is always a factor with people, regardless, crowds and things like that. So, Jared, why don't you talk for about maybe 12 or so minutes about some of the topics that you want to touch upon.
I'm going to have to talk real fast. All right. Again, thank you all for being here tonight. I appreciate you all coming out with the weather. And also thank you to Nassau County Bar Association and Richard Solomon. And the staff here at my father's place is fantastic. And, of course, 2 industry legends sitting next to me, Alex and Eppy. Thank you guys for being here. So I wanted to touch on security, and security's changed much in recent years. It's no longer the guy wearing the blue shirt and the dark pants at the door. There's a lot of aspects that have come to play due to litigation over the years, and it's changed the industry tremendously. I'm going to talk about licensing. If your clients are dealing with security, you must make sure that that security staff is licensed by New York State Department of State. Otherwise, they risk losing their state liquor authority license. They can come in and close you down. The reason why that came about, there was unfortunately loss of life involved. A homicide back in 2006 in Manhattan. A young lady by the name of Emet St. Guillem lost her life at a bar she was at one night. An unlicensed security officer at the door, known as a bouncer, of course, offered her a ride home, and unfortunately that was her last ride home. New York State stepped in and said, hey, we've been licensing people all along, but we haven't been enforcing it. Now it's 100% mandatory enforcement. So New York State Department of State does issue every security guard in New York State a actual license that they have a pocket card, and their photo from their DMV driver's license is the same one on that card. So your client should be checking to make sure that their staff is fully licensed by the state. That incident that I was talking about wound up resulting in several civil suits, one against the government because the person who was convicted of the murder was out on parole and was not monitored. There was a bail enforcement school that person had attended, and they had given him badges and ID cards. And that person was using those badges and ID cards to abduct people off the streets of New York City. As a result, security guards in New York State do not carry badges. It is not legal unless it is in a square form. And the New York State Department of State dictates the size and color. Now there are training requirements required by the state. All security guards are required to take annual in-service training and an initial 8 and 16-hour training program. And New York State Department of State now maintains a database of all active and inactive licenses. So you can check as an employer to see right on the spot if that person is in fact licensed by the state or if their license is expired. I'm going to move on. We were talking about alcohol. Alcohol is a major part. Security staff are now trained to monitor alcohol consumption, overconsumption. They're also trained to monitor staff to see if there's any kind of employee theft taking place in the lines of staff members overpouring patrons. Staff members are also able to check through closed-circuit television systems now and telephone apps that can tell if liquor in bottles is being changed out unlawfully. So getting back to security in general. So we have several types of security. We have mobile patrol, bicycle, Segway, fixed posts with security guards at doors, exits, and restrooms. One thing I specialize in is canine explosive detection. It's very widely underused and should be used at major mass gathering events. I was actually at Barclay Center yesterday, and their security there was quite woeful. I was actually able to walk in unchallenged with my firearm, went right through the metal detector, didn't go off. Of course, I'm licensed to carry a firearm, but there's very little regard sometimes with either poor training on staff or just they don't want to be bothered with the running of all those people through metal detectors. But I walked right through. My firearm did not set off their metal detector, and it makes me wonder how many other people were able to walk right through. Also, the other thing that security handles is fire guard watch. The new thing is everyone's vaping. They think it's legal to go inside and vape because it's not generating any smoke. What people don't realize is that all these smoke alarms right up there, I'm sure there's one right above you in the back, all these smoke alarm systems will go off when people are vaping. It'll go off and cause the fire department to respond in the middle of performances, causing unneeded evacuation of the building. We also have Fire Watch doing evacuation plans in the event of a smoke alarm or fire alarm going off. And since the incident in Rhode Island several years ago, a band was using pyrotechnics on stage and set off a fire and resulted in the deaths of 100 patrons. So in New York City, it's a requirement of the New York City Fire Department that security or a standalone fire guard is present at these venues. New York City Fire Department itself, if it's a New York City venue, does actually certify security staff in fire watch technologies and how to operate the fire alarm control panel. Other concerns of recent times are active shooters. A lot of times security is targeted first. They're usually at the door. If a person storms a location, they're aiming for security. They want to take that security guard out. In recent years, security guards are now carrying bulletproof vests, tasers, firearms, and other weapons. The communications, of course, are very important. There's brand new systems out now that use push-to-talk technology where security teams can all communicate with each other live and have an online dispatcher that can be located on the other side of the country, but they're controlling everything going on inside the venue. And they're capable of summoning local police, fire, and EMS for assistance. Another important thing is police liaisons are now the new thing. A lot of venues are hiring retired or off-duty police officers to stay at the door and be the liaison between security and the local police department. It smooths things over, especially if you have a liquor license involved and you don't want anything to jeopardize that license. A lot of times a police officer being present at the venue can smooth things out rather than have things escalate. And one thing that was touched on before is, especially at entertainment venues, is there's a lot of merchandise that's floating around. You need security to not only protect your trademarks, but your concessions and your food and beverage. In a lot of cases, entertainers have in their contract that they get a certain percentage of the merch, and there are companies out there that do secret auditing where they're watching the merchandise stands and they're actually accounting for what's being sold and getting that information back to the legal team. I also wanted to touch finally on talent protection. Bodyguards. You don't need to be an A-list celebrity to need a bodyguard. There's a lot of crazy people out there that will stalk people over the internet, show up at shows. The current right now is we do a lot of pre-show and after-show protection, where there's a lot of people that will either put online threats or, for whatever reason, are targeting that individual. We have the capability of locating those people and following them and knowing if they're at a venue. Of course, we liaise with federal law enforcement on issues like that usually, and bring that to their attention that those people are present. We're pretty good.
All right, cool.
Okay.
All right, Mark, you go to the laptop. So we're going to try to do a lot of questions now from the outline that you may have been given to by Jennifer Groh, who's the very, very great person who is in charge of the Nassau Academy of Law. As many of you know, WLIR, which was local here and broke a lot of the great music, is now gone. PLJ, remember PLJ? They went off the air. KFOG, which was sort of a big station out in California, they went off the air. So let me ask Eppy and Alex, where are the PLJs, the LIRs, and the KFOGs of today to find new talent?
There are no radio stations to speak of that are finding new talent. Once in a while, there's a niche radio station like The Shark at 104.3 in Miami, which is playing new music. And BBC 6 is still an alternative radio station in England, which you can hear digitally. If you're just sitting, you can get the app for it, or you can just hear it on your computer. I think most of the new music is being discovered by young people on the internet. Wouldn't you say, Alex?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, stations now are very controlled. Most DJs who sit at the station don't control the songs they play. Very, very few actually control the songs they play. They basically sit in front of a computer that's playing the songs, and then they get a notice on the computer that it's their break and they should say something, and then the computer then plays whatever songs the computer decides to play. So there's very little power, whereas in the past it was the DJ that would decide, oh, well, I like this song, I'm going to just spin it, and we had like Dennis McNamara, who actually Eppy hired, who discovered bands like The Police and U2 and Depeche Mode, and created a whole new wave of artists that came to the United States. So those people.
There's a great documentary.
That's right.
Called Dare to Be Different, which you can get on Showtime, or I think it's now on Amazon, Netflix, and it's all about WLAR and the 700 bands that Dennis McNamara discovered. And if you want to access that, kids.
Yeah, so there was a group. One of the things about that mafia that controlled the music business is they may have been mafiosos in their way, but they knew the business. It's like an age when newspaper men or women ran newspapers, and people knew their business. They knew a hit when they heard it. They knew talent when they saw it, and they cultivated. It's like what you told me about, because I learned from Eppy stories. Really, I mean. When I first got into business, Stephen Van Zandt asked me this is a long time ago, asked me to start a production company. And I told him, I said, I don't know anything about the music business. And he looked at me and says, neither does anybody else. And so I was like, okay. But I needed somebody who knew. And we brought on Eppy. And he would tell me these stories. And one of the things he told me is Jerry Moss would say, well, we're like farmers. You plant the seed and you have to let it grow and you develop it and things like that. And that's why he says I sign artists for 5 albums over 7 years. Because this way it takes that long for them to have the hit. The first album, the second album may not do it. It'll be the third or fourth album that's going to break them. And they understood it. They understood developing artists. I mean, when Bruce Springsteen couldn't tour because he had a dispute with his record label, and particularly with his manager at the time, Frank Barcelona, who was probably the most powerful promoter in the country, lent Bruce Springsteen $100,000. This is in the 1970s, so that he could survive. And he would tell Eppy and other club owners, says, you got to book this kid, and you got to pay him $1,500 or $2,000, and you're going to lose money, but down the road he's going to be a star. He's going to make you money. And they would do that. They understood that they had to support the developing artists because that was the future of their business. Well, that's all gone. I mean, the people who run the entertainment industry, by and large, they don't know. They wouldn't know a good song from a bad song, a good movie from a bad movie, and they're not investing the resources in developing a band. And that's why we opened this club, and that's why we're doing the TV show, is because somebody's got to do it. And we ourselves were doing it because we believe in music, but we need the industry to see that that's its future. And when the Rolling Stones stop touring, that's $100, $200 million a year. That's just not going to come back.
If any of you know my cousin Jules Epstein, he's an attorney, I guess, in Garden City. He has up in his office a contract from the William Morris Agency that had those 3 options from Bruce Springsteen. I think it was like $300 a show, exercisable in 3 years. I don't know. He thinks that that's a cool thing to have in his office. I don't know.
One thing that's kind of cool is Eppy mentioned the WLIR movie Dare to Be Different. It is on Showtime, and if you want, we did a radio show where we interviewed Ellen Goldfarb, and it's really a great show because if you really love music, it's just a phenomenal show. And we also did a radio show with all the WLIR people. It was Eppy, Seth Rudman, Peter, Dennis McNamara, and we talked all about what it was like being on WLIR back in the day and some of the great stories. All right, but moving on. Alex was on WABC Radio along with myself, and one of the things that we talked about in a show on Sunday night called Mind Your Business, a business show, because they were highlighting My Father's Place as a business, was the synergy of brands and how brands help brands and how music sells products. You want to talk a little bit about that because you were very powerful in that clip.
Well, it used to be that in the 60s, bands didn't want to sell out. They would refuse to be, you'd sell out if you did a commercial or something like that. But now you want to sell out. Because the corporations, it's funny because the music industry was when I got into it was a very conservative industry in the sense that people were afraid to lose their jobs. They didn't want to try something new. They were reluctant by then to sign new bands because it was expensive to develop a band. I mean, you can't create the Rolling Stones. You have to find them. And then you got to put money into them. And it takes years. And then you may be $3, $4, $5, $6, $10 million down the road before they start to make money back. So they stopped doing that. And so, but what happens is that it was the corporations. So at the time when we were trying to help new bands and the record industry wanted a clone of Britney Spears, or Beyonce or somebody, it turned out that we went to Pepsi and they didn't want a clone of Coke's advertising campaign. Dunkin' Donuts didn't want the same advertising campaign that, Starbucks had. So they were open, and they understood that music sells everything. So they were open to showcasing new bands in their way and giving us the money to put together concerts, TV shows, whatever, films to showcase these new bands. They were very, very, actually quite hip. And so, and what happens when you work with a brand in that level, is that you begin to realize how powerful branding is and how important it is in everything you do. Just like My Father's Place as a brand. And even if I had a band coming to me and telling me, that they wanted to be famous, I'd say to them, you need to be a concept because ultimately you're going to want to be a brand. You know what I mean? But what I found is that it is the ability to cross-promote, the ability to have your song playing in every Dunkin' Donuts in the country, the ability to have a commercial, Chrysler putting a commercial of that band's song on their commercial, that is priceless. And it was something the record companies at the time weren't doing and couldn't do. So we went to corporations. I mean, Eppy and I, on our own, went to Dunkin' Donuts and tried to convince them to buy our idea, and they bought it. And then they spent millions on festivals, and they helped a lot of new bands. And I think that is the future. I mean, if I was advise managers, I say go where the money is. And the money is the corporations that are looking for something new, something different, and see music as a way to reach young people. And if you've got some good bands, they might be interested in signing them. Don't even bother going to the record label. Go to Pepsi.
Right. Well, that's actually like perfect timing for this slide, which is about content, which is it's the only commodity to really monetize and let's talk a little bit about artist development, because there are a lot of young bands out there, and we play them on the radio, we bring them into the station, we bring them on stage here, we help promote them. Why don't you guys both talk separately about artist development, especially
are people going to be able to ask questions today?
Oh yeah, if you want to ask questions, I've got a mic.
Well, someone should walk. Mark, can you walk around with a mic? In case
Yeah,
anyone wants to ask
if you have a
questions?
question, just
If you have
raise
a
your hand.
question,
Yeah.
just interrupt us, all right? If it's something you want to know, we can help you. But the star-making machinery, again, I think what Alex wants me to talk about is that you could become a star as easy as like that if they wanted to make you a star, because they would go in the studio, they'd get the studio musicians, they'd get the songs written, they'd get your teeth fixed, get your hair done, put you out on the road. And no matter what kind of crap it was, it would get played over and over again. It would be so repetitive that you'd go out and you'd buy the record. And this happened so many times. There's so many bands and singers that were like that. There were 3 girls called Bananarama, and there was an argument between 2 record executives. They went up to the art department with a bunch of girls doing art for other album covers. They said, I can make those 3 girls stars. Oh, yeah? I'll bet you. And it's one of those things that you hear about in the music industry. Hi, Bob. And there's so many stories like that where artists were made for pure ego by the men who ran the star-making machinery. Is that what you wanted me to say?
Well, I wanted to talk about the idea that, these people in particular understood the value of the artist. And in making the star-making machinery and putting the star-making machinery, they created a mechanism by which, a step-by-step mechanism. And my father's place was the kind of the minor leagues of that system. In other words, they would put you in my father's place, and they say, you're going to play here. And then you go to the next level, and then you go to the next level. And they tour you around. The last guy who was of that mold was David Geffen. And I remember, because we worked with David Geffen, and then he retired, and his, Nirvana, of course, was his discovery. But we worked with him on a band called the Archangels. But I remember he was telling me in his plan for the Archangels what he did with the Black Crowes. And he said every band has their own unique way to reach out to the people. And a band like the Archangels, they're like the Black Crowes. And what happens is every time they go to a venue, they attract crowds and they attract fans. All you got to do is put them in front of people, and the minute they play, these people are going to be their fans. We just got to get them in front of people. And so what Geffen did, and he did it again with the Archangels, but he just toured them. He just had them play here, play there, everywhere. And the Black Crowes became a huge success. And that was true for them. Another band, he might go, well, they need television, they need radio, they need this or that. Everybody had their own unique way of doing it. But the point was that, in my mind, was that these guys, they knew their business, and they also knew how to shape an artist and promote them properly. I want to kind of touch on one point, just as a whole thing, and that is, and I think you can see the trend coming from us, and that is that we believe in artists' rights. And we believe that in protecting artists' rights, it actually creates a greater, bigger, stronger industry. One of the things that's been happening, and that has happened, is that artists' rights are being diminished, particularly in the music business. And an example of this is what happened when Apple tried to release their music service, and they decided they were going to give 3 months of music free to all these people, and they weren't going to pay the artists for those 3 months of free music they were going to give all these people with iPhones and all that stuff. And if it wasn't for Taylor Swift, these artists would never have gotten paid for that. And she says, Apple's got all the money in the world. Why are you screwing all these artists? And actually, because she has the power and the visibility, they backed down and they decided to pay them. But that's the kind of arbitrary move that these major powers, because now you have real, extremely powerful corporate giants that control the music industry, that have no concern at all for the artist. To them, the artist is so small, it doesn't mean anything. So what's happening is that, but it took powerful artists to push them back.
Can I give a footnote? When the police came over, I brought them over because they had one song. They couldn't get a record deal in England. They were on a compilation record called No Wave, and they had a song called Roxanne, which I was crazy about. And I took the song over in the middle of the night to WLIR and played it 6 times. Of course, Dennis McNamara wouldn't talk to me for 2 weeks after that. But it did eventually become a Screamer of the Week. All the audience would vote for the best new song of the week. And they made Roxanne. Even though there was no records out, they made it Screamer of the Week. A&M Records, Jerry Morse, took the band and said, you got to put an album out. You're getting airplay on LAR in Long Island. All of a sudden, other stations started playing it. But there were no records out in the marketplace. So they hurried, they went in, they put a record out. The second time the police came over, the first time they came over, there were 30 people in the audience. The second time they came over, it was sold out. The third time they came over, which was only 4 months later, they sold out the Nassau Coliseum. That's how quickly the star-making machinery, well greased, was on behalf of the control of the record dons, as I call them.
Just the program code for this hour, for those listening at home, is 908F9A. That is 908F9A. So this is your program code for your credit. You have a question?
Microphone. Wait 1 second. So everyone.
This way we get it. We want to hear. We want to hear your question because this way it'll get nice and loud. You know, everybody can hear it.
The question I have relates to where does Apple think they can come off playing artists' musics without paying royalties and ASCAP fees? And I mean, how did they think they could get away with that?
And possibly because they saved the industry from itself a little while back, and possibly because nobody had been paying for music for such a long time. What had happened is that when the internet began, people began downloading music for free right off the bat, and the music business didn't do anything about it, except try to fight it. But they couldn't stop the ocean from coming in, and so what happened is that they weren't selling anything. I think that may be part of it, and part of it is that I believe, and I think this is why I wanted to be on this panel and wanted to talk to you, is because I believe a lot of it has to do with the erosion of artists' rights, that today, especially with these powerful companies, what we're going to see is that they don't appreciate it. And what happens is when these rights are eroded is you don't get new content. In other words, there's no reason for an artist to produce music if they're not going to get paid for it. So, I believe that, we live in a world right now where it's take whatever you can. And without the understanding that there's a future, you know what I mean, it takes... I'll give you an example. We've worked with new bands a lot. It takes about 2 years to take a new band who are very good players into a recording studio. It takes that long to get them that good. I mean, to be as good as the Stones or the Beatles or any of those kids were, I mean, you have to work at it. It's a business. So no, people don't want to invest in that. And so, but we need the new artists to be the industry of the future, or
Which is kind of ties. Oh, here. Mark.
Mark, do your job.
On Access TV, they have histories of many bands. Just the other day, I was watching the history of Lynyrd Skynyrd, and what an incredibly difficult time they had, as good as they were, especially being a Southern band, to finally make it onto a stage as a second act. And then finally they caught on, but it took years for that to happen.
And they worked incredibly hard. I saw that.
Yeah.
And they had Al Cooper as a producer.
Yeah, Al Cooper. So, but they have some great histories on a lot of the bands, which really is an education to see that.
They all paid their dues. Everybody had to work. Even the Beatles, they started when they were 15, 16. And they worked all the lower-end clubs in Germany and England. So by the time they broke it, they were a really good band.
I interviewed Kevin Howlett, who wrote a book called The Beatles at the BBC, and he was a phenomenal guy, and he was talking about how the Beatles would play all Friday night till late at night, and then at 9 a.m. they'd be on the BBC doing, I think it was called Breakfast Club or something like that. The Beatles played 57 times on the BBC, and his job was the historian and archivist, and he always said in the interview, and with me and with other people, how hard they worked. They paid enormous dues, and just like Leonard Skinner, don't underestimate the amount of work and sacrifice that it takes with talent to actually get to a certain point.
They also had one on David Bowie,
Oh, yeah.
which was incredible how long it took him to get to the point where, people were really listening to anything.
He had to change his name. He was Davy
Yeah.
Jones. Yeah.
And there was already a Davy Jones out there when the Monkees, yeah. And now, interesting, we were talking about that. We do feature here a lot of the young, upcoming people. There's Taz, I don't know if anybody knows Taz, but he's a great blues guitarist. He's a great kid. Lara Hope, who was ahead, they were the opener for the Stray Cats. And then we have people like Ray Lambiase, who's a great, local folk musician. In fact, we did a radio show where Ray and Lonnie Schlissel just came to the station, 88.1 FM locally, and they literally brought two acoustic guitars, sat at the station with the guitars in their laps, and they basically told stories, sang songs, talked about the inspiration for a lot of their music, and just talked about what influenced them and why they became artists. So really good stuff. All right, so there's Leonard Skinner, by the way, on the slide for you. Let's talk a little bit about the tools of current technology between social media, music videos, touring, and merchandise. Well, we talk a little bit about that. I mean, we certainly use Facebook, and we certainly use YouTube for all of our stuff. We have podcasting.
We for the club, if you're asking me about promoting my father's place, we have different genres of music: jazz, rock, blues, comedy, folk, reggae, and try to get different age groups to come in and enjoy the club and see a theatrical presentation. But some groups use different media, so you have to use it all, and we're still learning what works and doesn't work because it's moving so fast.
I mean, one thing we found out is newspapers don't work. I mean, it had been the standard for live venues. It was just the standard. You put the big ads, you do this and that, and it's just not working. In fact, what we found out is emails work in the right way as long as they're not spam. In other words, if we can, our members, or if we can get somebody to email somebody about our stuff, it's really interesting the changes that are happening, and we're having to navigate it, and we're having to learn it as it happens. I mean, we spend a lot of money, and then it's like, this is not doing anything. And yet we put a little bit of something there, and it's attracting an audience. It's different than in the old days when the Village Voice, all you had to do was put a couple ads in, boom, everybody knew about it. Well, the Village Voice is gone.
And just talking about paying dues, I know the Bronx Wanderers, and an interview I did with them, and it took them years and years of really hard work. I made a joke with Vinny, who's the front man, and I said, when you go to a club and play, it's like it takes you an hour to get out from the stage to sort of the place where you sign autographs. It's like Steve, Mike, Tony, Joe, and I said, you seem to know everybody. He said, because we played every club, every restaurant. We paid our dues. We worked so hard. It's true. And, they now have a residency in Las Vegas. All right, for the legal part of this, let's talk about contract writers and what artists need. Everybody knows about the famous Van Halen M&M clause. So one of the things I wanted to do is have a big bowl of M&Ms with the brown ones picked out, because everybody knows the story about the Van Halen contract writer. Essentially what that was is it was a test by Van Halen to see if actually anyone read the contract. It wasn't that they were prima donnas or they had a thing about brown M&Ms or whatever. Van Halen had, and this is in the materials we handed out, had pyrotechnics, they had lighting issues, big heavy equipment, and if they wanted to make sure that people were actually paying attention to what they needed at the venue, because there were so many safety and performance issues. Could we talk a little bit about, the contract writers here? Our contract writers on myfathersplace.com, but let's talk about that.
First of all, I just want to say, if any of you have any representation or any family members that want to play here, this club is essentially open to get young, new, original talent to play. And we welcome anyone to play here, and you can contact any of us if there's someone you know that needs to get their music on the stage in front of peers. Okay, that's my public service announcement. Writers. We read every writer because on a small level, like a club like this, acts are still in a development stage, or they're coming off of a high career, and now they're used to getting certain comforts, and they need a comfort zone. So that some of the things look sort of wacky when you get an act from the 60s coming in. But what we try to do here is to maintain some kind of a comfort level for acts, whether they're new acts coming up or they're old acts going out. So, did you want me to talk about some of those stupid things? Is that what you're asking?
Well, it's just
me,
like
Mark?
about making sure about sound equipment, materials, load-in time, sound checks. There's a lot of before the show goes on. I mean, John back there has to do the soundboard. Emily has to make sure of all the ticketing. There's so much that goes on with what the artists need as far as equipment and sound and monitors, recording. We actually provide a service of recording. That's artist content. It's content for us.
In this business, everything's a contract. It's all contracts, and it starts with us issuing an offer sheet. And the offer sheet is very, very clear, and it says we will pay you this much, we will provide you with this, and that's it. And then they send back a contract, and it says they want this, they want this, they want this, they want this, and then we send them, we mark up that contract, and you say you can't have this, this, and this, and this. And then come the writers, and some of the writers are very specific. For example, our general writer, there's no pyrotechnics. You know what I mean? You can't, do certain things with the sound. There are limits to what they can do. Security is, of course, essential in various, So the writers, both of them, are designed in part to secure our security and their security. But everything is a contract, and everything has to be gone over because it has to be very, very clear. We don't want a situation where they said, "Oh, you promised us 5 hotel rooms." Well, it's not in the contract. You know what I mean? So, and then the other thing that's important is there's 2 parts of it, which is what do people want, and what do they get, and the other part of it is what are the rights that people have, and this is very, very important. So, for example, we don't have the right to televise their performance without their permission. We don't have the right to record it. We don't have the right to distribute it. There's a lot of things that we don't have the rights to. We ask them if we can, and it turns out now that just about everybody wants us to because they have no outlet for their performances. But the thing is that so the issue of rights is very, very important, and that has to be worked out in advance. We can't put something up without their permission. They own it, and at the same time we limit them from filming in our place. They can't film in our place and then use it somewhere else. That's not fair to us. So the issue of rights is a very big part of the contract, and the issue of who gets what in terms of accommodations, and then the question of security, which is that they may insist upon a bodyguard, they may insist upon certain things. We insist upon them. Their performances, they can't incite the crowd, they can't do things like that. As we get bigger and bigger, that's just this club. As you get bigger and bigger, the contracts become more specific in terms of what you can do, what you can't do, and as you go internationally and people travel internationally, the contracts get even more and more detailed. But everything's a contract. Every little thing that we do is a contract, and everything is specified. They know exactly when they see our writer all the gear, and if they have an objection to it, then they need to put it in writing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Now, your practice pointers as lawyers is to manage expectations. Because one of the biggest problems emotionally in contracts is, I thought, or you promised. And if you manage the expectation early on, That's why you need to have websites that are clear. You need to have certain things on your artist or venue websites that say what you do, what you don't do, what you allow, what you don't allow, especially as far as security, your security policies, your alcohol policies, this and that. It cannot be understated that you must manage expectations, because expectations are probably more of a leading cause than anything else for lawsuits. And people don't realize that. It's like a lot of times people feel that they were misled. They were disappointed. They didn't get what was promised. And as lawyers, your principal job is to manage expectations. I know they don't teach that in law school, but I really want to give that out there so that the artists are realistic, the performers are realistic, the venue is realistic, and everybody's realistic about what is expected and what will be delivered. You know. All right, so we don't have a lot of time. Let's talk a little bit about merchandise.
Right. Well, the thing about a venue is we need to protect it. You know, we need to keep it protected. And one of the things that's very interesting about it is that there's no sales tax on tickets sold, music tickets. And so as a consequence, we don't have to have a New York State sales tax number and things like that. So when we decided to go into merchandising, and by the way, that was a case that was fought by Eppy. Eppy actually won that case. By that time, he bankrupted him and his club, but he won that case against New York State, and it turns out that ticket sales are not subject to...
It's case law. Nassau County doesn't have any luxury tax. It was abolished in 1947, so that if you sell a ticket in the show in Nassau County, there is no sales tax
and it's actually,
on that show. And
it's true of New York State, actually. So what happens is that, on the other hand, merchandise does require a sales tax. So when we got into the merchant, and Richard and I had this discussion, because he's my lawyer, and I was like, well, it'd be better if we set up a separate entity for the merchandise. And this way we're protected in case, you know, we don't have to go through the issues of registering with the state and getting sales tax and all that stuff. And as it turns out, that it seems to us, as we create new entities to do new things, we're creating new corporations so that we protect the venue. You know, we protect the venue and we protect each entity. And that's been our strategy right now. Everything we do, we just start a new corporation.
One of the practice pointers I tell all my clients and fellow attorneys is you want to create islands. All your businesses should probably be separate and distinct. If something fails, it can be sort of just sacrificed and go on its way. But more importantly, one of the things that I've seen is when you have entities that sell merchandise and other things, what you don't want is the New York State sales tax authorities to say, well, this is really one big enterprise, and this is a disguised sale, so we're going to impute income. Now, remember, sales tax is one of those things where you're the custodian of the money, so there's a personal liability for not paying sales tax. And you don't want commingling. I mean, sales tax is sort of like a landmine for clients, lawyers, and everybody, and accountants. You want to have very good accounting. And what I tell everybody is whatever entity that is doing something involving sales tax should have its own separate corporation, its own separate bank account, its own separate sales tax ID, separate and apart from everything else. In fact, I even ask clients to use one completely different bank for your sales tax and a completely different bank for your general operations, because you really want to keep it separate so that if there is an audit, it's clean. And this is just sales tax, and this is this. The other thing is, sales tax is very tricky, especially now when you sell things over the internet. So, you know, you have a thing where maybe you have a client, they sell things on eBay and Amazon and this and that. Well, those companies take care of sales tax generally, but then if you sell on-site, then you got to deal with sales tax locally. So it's good to have very good accounting systems, be very, very strict, tell your clients that's not the place to be sloppy, and not to say, well, you know, I'm a little short this month, so I'll just borrow from here and then we'll just take care of it later. I've seen that countless times, and the results are horrendous, truly horrendous. I know that we only have a few more minutes. If you do have questions, please, Mark will give you the microphone. You know, one of the things that we feature outside of music are comics, and you want to just talk about that. It's comedy isn't what it used to be. It's very, very tough, and you know, they broke a lot of comics back in the day. And how does comedy work now, given the fact that
I have no idea how comedy works now. I mean, I think that these kids that go to comedy clubs, they go mindlessly. They don't know the acts. Usually, they're going to have a good time, and they're not even listening. They don't have the they don't have the capacity to listen for very long. So I'm still trying to figure out how comedy works today. Again, in the days of the star-making machinery, all the comics had records out, which would be played on the radio, and then they'd be on these talk shows, so that you sort of knew the comics. You knew their shtick. You saw them on Johnny Carson and everywhere else, so that they became artists that you wanted to see perform. Everyone's a comic, and everyone plays at a comedy club. So I can't answer that question. I'm sorry, Richard.
All right. Moving on to probably one of our last issues is sort of zoning issues. With venues, there's issues about parking, noise, liquor license. One of the more interesting cases in Nassau County involves an operator out in Wantagh who's been fighting a zoning issue for a long time against the town of Hempstead, because the town of Hempstead is very, very tough on things about restaurants and public assembly and this and that. So as lawyers, you really need to sit down with your clients and look at the horizon, which is, will the government actually let you open your venue? Say you want to put together a supper club, and you want to put together somewhere like, I don't know, the South Shore or some other place, or by the water, and something like this. There's so many problems in terms of red tape and construction and building permits. The amount of lawyers that are needed to start a club, between zoning and public assembly and parking issues. It's very hard. I mean, how would you find a place right now with ample parking to satisfy zoning requirements? As you notice on the slide, everything takes longer than clients expect in terms of budget, time, and financing. And many clubs and enterprises failed to get started because they didn't have the ability to weather the storm of red tape and delays.
I think it's a good idea if you want to open a venue to talk to the local politicians and the people and get their support. And if they have, we did it, opening this, we met with the mayor, we met with key people. They were very enthusiastic about reopening, especially when we told them our concept, supper club and things like that. And when it came to, like the buildings department, they wwere very, very quick to respond to things. And if they had said that they were not enthusiastic and they'd rather not have us, I think we would never have done it. It makes a real big difference. There's been plenty of shows, big shows, stadium shows, where the region or the city or the town didn't want it, and it's like, it's not worth it. It's not worth it to run over the local community to try to do that. And so I think it's a political thing, and it's a good idea, not just legally, but to get in with the politicians and the neighborhood. And if they're enthusiastic about it, then do it. And if they're not, then don't do it.
All right, so that's basically your CLE for tonight. We really appreciate you coming. We'll stay for afterwards if you have any questions. Thank you very much. Again, Jared Ring, Eppy, Alex, thank you very much. Any questions, email me, radio@myfathersplace.com. I'll certainly try to answer anything. If you want copies of the slides, we'll make it sure. And we're going to put this video up on YouTube so that if anybody missed it, wants the 2 credits, we'll have some for that. Drive home safely, everybody.